Alien Isolation is a game with a huge shadow cast over it by 2013's Aliens Colonial Marines. The shoddy, rushed, outsourced, half-arsed efforts by Gearbox Software have put a huge dent in the franchise, and it's kind of questioned whether, when it comes to video games, Alien is just plain cursed. Isolation, though, does its best to completely undo that, and frankly, you could do a lot worse than playing this game. So, let's quickly clear the air and just say that compared to Colonial Marines, Isolation is incredibly well made, incredibly thoughtfully made, and just a damn pleasure to play. Creative Assembly have done a very good job here, and considering their bread and butter is more RTS type games, they've done a fantastic job and deserve huge accolades for what they've done. Talking about the gameplay elements of Isolation. Now, this is where the game gets interesting. Obviously, it's a horror game. A lot of horror games these days rely on things like jump scares and things like very scripted moments to really get to you, and Isolation doesn't do that. Most of the game is pretty unscripted, thanks to the nature of the hide and seek elements and you running around and effectively trying to evade enemies. Most of the tension comes from just stress management. If you feel more safe when you know where the alien is, even if it's like directly in front of you, than when you don't know where it is. And this is a really, really fantastically put together element. It's not about, do you have the firepower, do you have the resolve to start a little bit of a jump. No, it's knowing where it is and how you're going to get from point A to point B. It's making you plan, it's making you think, it's getting into your head. And to support this, the game has some of the best sound design I've seen in the game for many years. The alien itself is quite large, much larger than most aliens we've seen in previous films and games. And as a result, it makes a lot of noise when it's moving around in like the air vents above you, when it's moving around on the floor. And this gives you kind of a huge idea of where it is or what it's up to, but it's never perfect, and it starts to mess with you a little bit when you start hearing things up in the vents in the later levels, when there isn't actually an alien there, it's just Sevastopol falling apart, and it really starts to play with you, and you start checking your motion tracker very often just to check where the thing might or might not be, and this is a fantastically put together element, and something that should really, really be heavily praised. Now, also I've mentioned quickly about hiding and getting from point A to point B. Now, hiding is a second mechanic in the game. Hiding is an interesting way of looking around. So the alien will slowly learn as to get to your tactics, and it'll slowly learn on how to get you and catch you and so on and so forth. And obviously that means you've got to outwit it. The most obvious way is to find a place and hide in it. This can work, there's nothing wrong with doing it. And it works pretty well. You can see it out into the area where the alien is, you can work out, you can even use your motion tracker to plot everything around you. The problem is that, as I mentioned, the alien starts to learn, and after a while it starts checking the cupboards, it starts checking lockers, it starts looking underneath desks, it's looking for you, it's got one job and that's to catch you. On top of the noise options as well, if you make too much noise, say if you start running around a lot, if you start bumping into things, that will also attract the alien. This also is interesting to note that firing weapons, particularly even the AI firing guns, will attract the enemy. This is a huge gamble because there are several situations where you could fire a gun and bring the alien out and let it have the AI human characters, or you could just sneak past a whole lot and hope and pray to God that you don't get spotted at all. Again, it's going back to how the game's making you plot and plan and think, and starting to get into your head by making you incredibly, incredibly stressed out. Now, there are a few other ways. I did touch briefly upon the idea of noise, and you can craft certain weapons and items to help you out. Now, most of these items end up being kind of relegated into being pointless. The most frequently spoken about one I've seen has been the Noisemaker. Personally, I never actually used it in the main game. I've used it in the survivor mode, but never in the main game. The most often crafted thing I used were medkits. Apart from that, the craft system, it's okay. It works what it's supposed to. It's a tiny bit clunky though, and I wish it was better implemented and better made. That said, it's quite nice to have it, and finding things like scraps of metal, injectors, blasting up some of the need to create items gives a nice little organic feel that you are literally scavenging and trying to survive while running around Sevastopol and making the most of a really, really bad situation. Now, you'll probably notice that I'm playing this on the Xbox 360. This current gen version of the game actually runs really well. It's very, very pretty, and for the most part, I've had no problems. There were a couple of areas where the frame rate did drop, and a couple of instances where textures took a second to load, but these are pretty negligible, and nothing ever game-breaking really happened. I had no major glitches, and I can't really complain in that regard. It's pretty damn solid. That said, if you have a choice of platforms, I would recommend getting the PC version of this game. The reason being, the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 version, while pretty, of course locked to 30 frames. The Xbox One and PlayStation 4 version, while somewhat prettier with an anti-aliasing thrown on, are also locked at 30 frames, a decision that to me makes very little sense. The PC version has the PS4 and X1's higher-end graphics, plus obviously a lot more anti-aliasing, plus 4K support, and 60 frames or unlocked frame rate available. So if you can get it on PC, just get it on PC. It's a pretty intensive game from what I've been reading for people trying to run it at the higher end settings, but if you can, good on you. That's how you should be playing it. Now, this area I'm going to talk about the story, and this is going to be slightly spoilerish, so I'm going to put up in the top left hand corner the TechnicalCakeMix logo. When it disappears, you know the spoilers are over, so if you don't want to hear this stuff, I would mute right about now. So it's kind of interesting to note that this is of course starring Amanda Ripley, who is Ellen Ripley's daughter. Now, Sigourney Weaver, the actress who played Ellen Ripley in the films, was actually really furious about Amanda's mention being cut out in the theatrical cut of Aliens. In Aliens, it's mentioned about how Amanda died 2 years before Ripley was found, and that she married a guy and she had no children, and her cremated remains are available at a certain crematorium. This really does help develop Ripley's character into a mother, and of course it plays into Aliens film. This also left a huge, nice little area that someone could fill in the gap and write a little story, and this is exactly what Creative Assembly have tried to do. And they have not taken many liberties, they've stuck to the alien lore, and they've done a very good job. Amanda's character is very much like her mother's. She's a lot more human compatible, if that makes any sense. She's more willing to try and risk herself to get an objective done, whereas Ripley is more slash and burn, more willing to blow up Hadley's Hope and aliens without really checking for any survivors, compared to Amanda, who would rather try and save everybody aboard the Sevastopol before she destroys it by sending it into a gas giant. In Sunny Senses, she's indeed a chip off the old block, but unique enough in her own way, and it's quite nice to have her. The supporting characters are hit and miss. There are a couple of fantastic ones, particularly the android character Samuels, who is one of my favourite androids actually to appear in the franchise. He's very compassionate, and you actually kind of feel bad for him when he starts to eventually die in the story. Unlike most other androids as well, he hasn't fallen to the bad android trope, which has been associated with the series for a while, of an android going evil and trying to kill people. He very much tries to defend Ripley, and though you see him being violent a few times, it's never towards a human, it's always towards another android, and it's very, very sweet to have him try and be a very an older brother figure to Ripley, and it works very well. Now, the other human, main human female associating with you is Taylor. She just kind of sucks. She's very annoying from the get-go. She's very bitchy and condescending, and then she just gets pathetic, and she doesn't really have like a moment where she kind of summons up all her inner strength and goes for it. She just kind of starts out a punk, acts like a little whiny bitch, goes out like a punk. It's not really huge character development, and honestly, her presence in the end really isn't worth it. There are a few other obviously characters aboard Sevastopol, including a marshal. The marshal is pretty typical. The real star from the marshal's office, though, is Ricardo. Ricardo is a lower-level marshal who helps Ripley out and is on the comm radio with her for a huge part of the second half of the game. He's a really likeable character, and again, you feel bad for him when he goes out, but a lot of his downfalls are down to his own bad luck. And you do feel bad for him when he does go, but eventually it's bad luck. Now, talking particularly about the alien itself, now, it's probably no secret now that there are multiple aliens in the game. Obviously, when you think about something like Sevastopol or a space station from the alien universe, these things are typically quite large, usually about the size of small cities. So you would think it would take a lot more than one to terrorize it, and you'd be right. You do indeed go down to a nest eventually, into a hive. Now, I'm going to point out here that you only ever, in the case of actual gameplay, see 2 at a time, or there's a maximum of 2 stalking you. Overall, there's probably about 7 or 8 you encounter throughout the course of the game at different points. There's also eggs and facehuggers. Now, the facehuggers I'll get into in a minute, but with the eggs, I find it interesting that there's no queen appearance, given that it could have been a nice little set piece. I understand why, though. This game is Alien and not Aliens. And it's completely understandable in that regard, though it does make odd notes to Prometheus, which kind of out of place, I must admit. Now, going back to the facehuggers, these guys frankly sucked. It was kind of cool to see them, and they're definitely a lot better than they've been in other games, but they're just kind of this weak jump at you, and they're an instant death when they get you. Here's the thing, though, they're kind of an annoying target to hit, and since they're an instant death, and they do this weird little weak jump, they just get annoying, and eventually you end up starting to reload points just to get around them. And the other problem is that they're usually in areas where there's drones or other Xenos. And, of course, you shoot them, you flame them, whatever. It makes noise, they come, you hide, and it just starts the process again. It's kind of an annoying thing. They were cool to have there, but it was a little, I guess, unnecessary. They didn't really add anything. They were cool, though. Nice little touch. Also kind of, speaking about cool little touches, it was really cool. There's a certain mission you get to play as the prisoner Marlowe, whose crew found the crash site on LV-426 with the space jockey and the wreck, much like, of course, the first Alien film. It's a cool little scene, and it's a very nice little touch, and it's very well rendered, probably one of the better graphical versions we've seen in this area. It's very nice to see again, and it's very nice to walk around. It's certainly better than it was in Colonial Marines, and that was one of the highlights of that game. Now, to wrap this whole thing up, the game itself is solid. It has a few problems, and so does every single game. That said, it's a fantastic game, and it's definitely worth your time and your money. Post-game, there is a survivor mode, which effectively is a time run of getting from point A to point B without getting killed. Obviously, there are optional objectives to increase your score, which kind of neatly gives it 2 different leaderboards, one for score and one for time. The post-game support and from the DLC, there is a season pass, which I've got to question why. If you got the Nostromo edition, which is for early adopters, you got an exclusive mission where you got to play as the original cast of Alien, and there is an extra downloadable mission where you get to play as Ripley in the last scene, from the first Alien film. I've got to question why there's a season pass, I must admit, given that they're mostly adding survivor maps, but if they were to add a single player bit of DLC where you had to play another character to fill in a bit more of the story, I'd be fine with it. It's really, really worth your time. It's definitely worth some money. I would say £30 and under. And I'm not normally in the habit of giving, I guess, that many number scores out. I do it every now and then, but it's not really something I do often. This case, though, I'm going to give it one, and I'm going to say it's an 8.5 of 10. It would be a solid 9 if a few things were fixed, like I mentioned in the spoiler section about a certain annoying crawly enemy, and if the crafting system was better implemented, but it's otherwise very solid. It's definitely worth your time. Pick it up when you can. And I want to give one last shout out to Alvaro G. Plata, whose channel I've linked in the description, for the soundtrack. This is a remastered version of the original Alien film, and it sounds bloody brilliant, and shout out to you. Thank you very much for watching. Please do let me eBay a little bit here for you to like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you liked it, and share with your friends. And I will see you at the next video.